We've discussed that neither Link nor Mario are psychopaths, but what about Kratos from the God of War games? He's done a bit more than jump on a few mushrooms. I should note that I use the term psychopath for the viewer's benefit. A more appropriate clinical term would be antisocial personality disorder. Again, in this case, antisocial doesn't mean that a person doesn't like to be around others or likes to avoid parties. It means that they don't care about other people. They have no empathy for them at all. There's a list of criteria for antisocial personality disorder, and a person would need to meet at least 3 of them. I'll read the ones that seem relevant to Kratos. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another person. Let's briefly look at those in a bit more detail and how they pertain to Kratos. Kratos breaks social norms and laws to the extent that he kills the lawgivers, the gods. He's defiant in virtually every situation we see him in. His impulsivity has led him to kill his own wife and daughter. It's hard to get more impulsive than that. Kratos is extremely aggressive and is almost always engaged in mortal combat. Though many of the people Kratos has killed have been during mutually agreed upon physical fights, he's killed people that were just bystanders and didn't want to fight at all. With regard to antisocial personality disorder, it's very telling that Kratos apparently has no remorse for any of his actions. With the exception of how he feels about killing his own wife and daughter, he seems to regret almost nothing at all and feel no remorse at all. At face value, Kratos definitely meets criteria for antisocial personality disorder. That is, unless cultural considerations can offer another explanation of what's going on. It's worth noting that Kratos was a soldier during times of war, and his culture might not have considered killing another person as particularly unusual given their circumstances. Some of Kratos' behaviors seem understandable. For example, when he assaulted Ares when he was a child, it was because Ares had kidnapped his brother. Kratos has been very violent towards his father, but that's because his father was constantly lying and being physically violent towards him. Now, Kratos' situation and his environment definitely muddy the diagnostic waters. However, there appear to be some instances where Kratos' lack of empathy have led to extremely violent behavior to the extent of killing innocent victims. There have been times when Kratos has been helped by a neutral, non-violent person, and then he proceeds to kill that person, and doesn't seem to feel bad about it at all. With regard to diagnosing antisocial personality disorder, this behavior is particularly revealing. Though some of Kratos' actions might be understandable considering his environment and the trauma he's been through, most people who have been through trauma don't proceed to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Looking at the big picture, I would diagnose Kratos with antisocial personality disorder. And yes, if it were 1980, I would call him a psychopath. It's worth noting that not everyone with antisocial personality disorder shows behavior as extreme as Kratos, and a person who has killed another person wouldn't necessarily be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Well, this is definitely the most troubling of the issues Kratos is dealing with, but there might be some more things that are going on. There's a mental health issue called intermittent explosive disorder. It's when a person fails to resist aggressive impulses that lead to serious harm to others or their property. Sound like somebody we've talked about? In addition to sudden violent outbursts, this condition is also characterized by a person's response being completely out of proportion to what's warranted for the situation. Let's say I hired some movers to move my stuff and they drop my TV. Now, a proportionate, if inappropriate, response might be to yell at those people and demand that they pay for a new TV. A disproportionate response might be to start hitting them and then destroy their car with a baseball bat. So is this what's going on with Kratos? Actually, it's pretty unlikely. You see, to get a diagnosis of intermittent explosive disorder, there can be no other mental health issue that better explains what's going on. In Kratos' case, I would say that antisocial personality disorder offers a much better explanation for his violent behavior. For example, Kratos rarely, if even more than once, expresses remorse for his actions. This is characteristic of antisocial personality disorder and not of intermittent explosive disorder. Additionally, Kratos' behavior seems purposeful and goal-oriented, which is not characteristic of intermittent explosive disorder. This diagnosis is actually pretty rare because there's almost always another mental health diagnosis that better explains what's going on. Well, some of you might be thinking, well, Kratos has a right to be angry. He's been through some horrible things. Funny you should bring that up, because that's what we're going to talk about next time. Kratos has had many difficult experiences. The one that seems to affect him the most is the time he accidentally murdered his wife and daughter. Does his later behavior indicate he has post-traumatic stress disorder? Diagnosing PTSD is actually quite complex. There's not enough time in this video to explain all the different ways it might be manifest, but I'll do my best to describe it in a brief but accurate way. There are 6 main categories to PTSD, and there's a list of criteria in each of those categories. Category 1, the person needs to have experienced something traumatic. This could be from a wide variety of things, but it often involves actual or threatened death or serious injury. Category 2, the traumatic event needs to be re-experienced in some way. This could be from dreams or flashbacks, or perhaps a person feeling highly distressed when they're reminded of the trauma. Category 3, a person avoids things that reminds them of the trauma, and there's a general emotional numbing. Category 4, persistent symptoms of increased alertness, such as hypervigilance, being easily startled, or struggling to sleep. Category 5, the symptoms last for more than a month. In Category 6, the symptoms significantly impact that person's functioning. Let's look at those criteria, particularly as they pertain to Kratos. From Category 1, Kratos was involved in the death of his wife and daughter. Their ashes were permanently fused to his skin. His response to this was extreme horror and regret. From Category 2, Kratos has dreams and flashbacks of the event that are very troubling to him. From Category 3, Kratos seems to have that emotional numbing. Things that are normally pleasurable to him aren't at all. He has a very restricted range of emotional affect. He displays virtually nothing more or less than extreme anger. This is despite obviously feeling depressed, which is evidenced by his suicide attempt. From Category 4, Kratos frequently struggles to fall asleep, and he has outbursts of anger. From Category 5, his symptoms have been going on for well over a month. It's been many years. And from Category 6, Kratos' social functioning has been severely impacted. After examining all of this information, I would diagnose Kratos with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's worth noting that PTSD doesn't fully describe all of his actions, but those are discussed in other videos. Even though Kratos' actions are cruel and merciless in many cases, I do have a certain amount of empathy for the guy. Well, there's one more diagnostic issue to focus on with Kratos, so make sure to catch our last episode on him next week. Is there a difference between the depression felt from losing your job and the depression associated with major depressive disorder? Well, from a diagnostic point of view, actually yes. Certain life events have predictable emotional responses. I would predict a person to feel quite depressed after losing their job. However, sometimes people have extreme emotional or behavioral responses to those things. I wouldn't expect a person to become suicidal after losing their job. These bigger than usual emotional or behavioral responses to events are part of a mental health condition known as adjustment disorder. Could this be what's going on with Kratos? Many of Kratos' behavioral problems, but not all, started after he accidentally killed his wife and daughter. His response to this was feeling extremely depressed and angry. While a certain amount of this makes sense and is logical, a very extreme event led to a very extreme emotional and behavioral response, what's out of proportion is that Kratos went on to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Part of adjustment disorder is that the symptoms would go away within 6 months of the triggering event. If that's not the case, then perhaps another diagnosis would be more appropriate. In Kratos' case, his symptoms have been going on for many years, much longer than 6 months. Additionally, adjustment disorder isn't an appropriate diagnosis if another diagnosis offers a better explanation of the emotional response or the behavior. In Kratos' case, antisocial personality disorder and PTSD probably do a better job of explaining what's going on with his emotions and his behavioral responses. In short, adjustment disorder probably isn't a good fit for Kratos because he's had the symptoms for far too long, and some other mental health disorders do a better job of explaining what's going on with him. Well, that's it for Kratos. Truly a tragic figure, like many of the other characters in Greek mythology. Well, next time we will be talking about Red, the Pokemon trainer. What's the deal with him getting all these animals to fight each other?